As Elena turned to leave the ward, the hallway behind her seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit now a distant, unreachable void. Then from the darkness, a brittle, whispering voice rasped her nominat in a plea, but in a knowing, guttural certainty, as if it had been waiting for her all along. In 1975, deep within the labyrinthine corridors of an abandoned hospital in Manila, a young nurse named Elena found herself drawn to the dark heart of a place long forsaken by the living. Unlike her colleagues who shuddered at the mere mention of the hospital's old wards, Elena was compelled by a mixture of professional curiosity and a personal need to understand the tragic stories whispered among the hospital's ruins. The ward she sought was known simply as the Forgotten Ward, a section of the hospital that had been closed off decades earlier after a series of unexplained incidents and a string of inexplicable patient disappearances. On a humid evening in late October, Elena, clad in the modest uniform of a nurse, her eyes determined yet laced with apprehension, stepped through the iron-barred gate of the derelict hospital. The building loomed like a ghost from the past, its broken windows and crumbling facade testifying to years of neglect. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and dampness, and even before she crossed the threshold, Elena could feel the oppressive weight of the history that seeped from every brick. Inside, the hospital was a cavern of shadows and echoes. Elena moved cautiously along deserted corridors, lined with peeling paint and dusty remnants of what once were cheerful murals. Her footsteps stirred up small clouds of dust that danced in the sparse beams of light, filtering through gaps in the ceiling. Every creak of the old floorboards and every distant drip of water amplified her sense of isolation. For Elena, who had dedicated her life to healing, this place represented not only the decay of a once vibrant institution, but also a repository of sorrow and secrets that refused to die. Elena's destination was the Forgotten Ward, a section that had been sealed off following a scandal that the hospital administration had desperately tried to erase from public memory. Rumors persisted among the old staff and local residents that in the final days of the ward's operation, patients had vanished without explanation, and that their anguished cries could still be heard echoing through the darkened halls. Elena's resolve was as much personal as it was professional. Her late grandmother had once worked at this very hospital, and stories of her whispered accounts of inexplicable happenings had haunted Elena since childhood. Tonight, she intended to uncover the truth. After a long trek through winding corridors and abandoned patient rooms filled with relics of a bygone era, a tattered teddy bear, faded photographs, a rusted wheelchair, Elena finally reached a heavy, reinforced door with a tarnished plaque reading, "Forgotten Ward." The door, bolted and chained, bore the scars of desperate attempts at force and the ravages of time. With trembling hands, she retrieved a set of old keys that had been left to her by her grandmother, keys that were said to open any door in the hospital. The sound of metal against metal as the lock yielded was oddly loud in the heavy silence that pressed in around her. Beyond the door lay a corridor unlike any other in the hospital. The lights were dim, powered by a feeble emergency system that cast long, dancing shadows across the faded linoleum floor. The air here was chill, and a fine mist seemed to hover near the ground, as if the space itself exhaled the sorrow of its past. Patient rooms, once places of hope and recovery, were now transformed into shrines of despair. Beds lay unmade, and in some rooms, overturned chairs and scattered belongings hinted at a sudden, frantic evacuation. The silence was not complete. It was punctuated by soft, almost imperceptible sounds, a distant, mournful sob, the faint whisper of footsteps that did not belong to any living soul. Elena pressed forward, guided by a combination of trepidation and determination. She entered a room at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she was met with an overwhelming feeling of sorrow. The room was arranged like a patient's quarters, complete with a battered bed, a small table, and a single dusty window that framed a view of a desolate courtyard. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like faded red paint, were the words, "They are here." The message sent a chill down her spine, but Elena steeled herself, remembering her duty to seek the truth. As she moved from room to room, Elena discovered more unsettling signs of the ward's tragic history. In one room, a set of medical files lay scattered on the floor, their pages brittle and stained with what could only be tears or blood. She picked one up, and the faded handwriting detailed the desperate pleas of a patient who spoke of shadows that whispered in the dark, of unseen figures that visited in the dead of night. The entries were erratic, marked by increasing fear and paranoia until they ended abruptly. The air seemed to grow heavier as she read, and Elena felt as though invisible eyes were watching her every move. Venturing deeper into the ward, Elena reached what appeared to be the nurse's station, a small, cramped room cluttered with old ledgers, typewriters, and forgotten trinkets. It was here that she uncovered a journal belonging to a nurse who had worked in the ward during its final fateful days. The entries detailed disturbing events, unexplained power outages, phantom footsteps in the hallways, and, most horrifying of all, the sudden disappearance of several patients after a strange incident involving a burst of static that filled the ward. The nurse wrote of a night when the ward seemed to come alive with malevolent energy, a night when the boundary between the living and the dead was blurred beyond recognition. As Elena absorbed each harrowing detail, she couldn't help but feel that she was not alone in the room. An inexplicable pressure weighed upon her, as if the journal itself carried a curse. The deeper Elena ventured, the more palpable the presence of something beyond the ordinary became. In the central corridor of the ward, the dim emergency lights began to flicker, casting stuttering shadows that moved in ways that defied logic. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a low, mournful hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she followed the source of the hum to a narrow passage that led to an inner chamber. The passage was barely wide enough to allow her to squeeze through, and its walls were lined with peeling, damp plaster that oozed with an unidentifiable substance. Every step she took in that claustrophobic space intensified her dread. At the end of the passage, she entered a room that was entirely different from the rest of the ward. This room, bathed in an otherworldly bluish glow, appeared to have been a place of ritual. Strange symbols were etched into the floor, and an array of archaic medical instruments, scalpels, forceps, and bizarre contraptions were arranged in a pattern that resembled an altar. In the center of the room lay a circular pool of water, its surface disturbingly still. The reflection that stared back at Elena from the pool was not entirely her own. For a fleeting moment, she saw the faint outline of a gaunt, sorrowful face hovering behind her reflection. She spun around, but nothing was there, only the oppressive darkness of the room. The encounter left her shaken, her mind reeling with the possibility that the ward was not merely haunted by memories, but by something that transcended the natural order. Unable to shake the feeling of being ensnared by the ward's dark history, Elena retreated back into the main corridor. Yet the further she walked, the more she sensed that the ward was alive with echoes of its tragic past. Whispers floated on the stale air, indistinct and desperate, as if the souls of the long-forgotten were attempting to communicate. In one instance, she could almost discern a plea for help, a soft, broken cry that sent shivers racing along her spine. It was as though the ward itself was imploring her to uncover the mystery behind its endless sorrow. As the night wore on, Elena's determination gave way to an overwhelming sense of dread. Her rational mind battled with the mounting evidence of the supernatural, and she began to question whether her quest for knowledge was worth the price of her sanity. The journal she had found at the nurse's station lay open in her trembling hands, its final entry urging her to never look back, and warning that those who disturb forgotten would find themselves forever entwined with its fate. The words seemed to echo in her mind as she struggled to reconcile the rationality of her profession with the inexplicable horrors unfolding around her. At a turning point, Elena encountered what could only be described as a definitive sign of the ward's dark power. In a narrow hallway lined with patient rooms, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy, began to follow her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding like a drum, yet the footsteps persisted, matching her every stride. Desperation clawed at her as she tried to lose the unseen pursuer by darting into side rooms and taking sharp turns, but each attempt proved futile. The sound was inescapable, a constant reminder that she was not alone. Finally, she found herself in a dead-end corridor, the oppressive air pressing in from all sides. With nowhere left to run, she turned slowly to face the darkness. There, emerging from the shadows, was the unmistakable silhouette of a figure. Tall and gaunt, draped in what appeared to be the tattered remnants of a hospital gown, the figure moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied its otherworldly nature. Its face was obscured by a haze of shadow, but in the faint light, Elena could see eyes that burned with an eerie, otherworldly intensity. The figure did not speak, yet its presence communicated a message of profound sorrow and warning. In that moment, Elena understood that this was not a mere apparition, but a guardian of the ward's tragic history, a soul condemned to wander in eternal lament for the lives lost within these walls. With a silent plea, the figure raised a hand as if beckoning her to follow. Despite the terror that gripped her, Elena felt an irresistible pull, a compulsion to understand, to see the truth behind the veil of horror that had shrouded the forgotten ward. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward, following the spectral guide deeper into the recesses of the hospital. The figure led her through a series of winding corridors that Elena had never seen before. The architecture of these passages was markedly different, narrower, with walls that seemed to pulse as if alive. Every step felt as though it were echoing not just through the hallways, but through the very fabric of time. The atmosphere was thick with an inexplicable sadness, and Elena could feel the weight of countless unspoken regrets pressing down on her. After what felt like an eternity, the figure brought her to a heavy door, more ornate than any she had encountered in the hospital. Engraved with symbols that were both cryptic and haunting, the door exuded an aura of finality. With a slow, deliberate motion, the spectral guardian pushed the door open. Beyond lay a vast chamber bathed in an eerie luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very walls. At the center of the room, illuminated in a pale, otherworldly light, stood a large mirror framed in intricate, time-worn carvings. Elena approached the mirror with cautious reverence. As she gazed into its depths, she was met not with her own reflection, but with a tableau of the ward in its final moments. The mirror revealed images of frantic nurses, anguished patients, and a darkness that seeped into every corner of the room. Amid the chaos, she saw a figure, a doctor whose eyes were filled with a madness born of desperate ambition. The doctor was at the center of a ritual, surrounded by patients whose expressions were twisted in terror. The scene was chaotic and surreal, a snapshot of a moment when the natural order had been violently upended by forces that should never have been tampered with. The vision in the mirror sent a jolt through Elena's entire being. She realized that the ward had been the stage for experiments that straddled the boundary between life and death, a night when human ambition had collided with forces beyond comprehension, unleashing an evil that would haunt the institution for decades to come. The spectral guardian remained silent as Elena absorbed the weight of the revelation. In that mirror, she saw the faces of the lost, their eyes pleading for release from an eternal nightmare. Unable to tear herself away from the vision, Elena remained transfixed until the image slowly faded into darkness. When she blinked, her own reflection reappeared, but it was altar-etched with the deep lines of sorrow and understanding that only true horror can inflict. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was now irrevocably a part of the ward's legacy. The experiments, the tragedies, and the unyielding sorrow of that cursed night had left their mark on her soul. Determined to free herself from the ward's malignant influence, Elena resolved to uncover every detail of the dark ritual that had been performed, and to expose the truth that had been hidden for so long. With renewed resolve, she retraced her steps back through the winding corridors, her mind awash with the revelations gleaned from the mirror. Every echo of her footsteps seemed to carry with it the voices of the departed, urging her to remember, to honor the victims of that fateful night. For hours, Elena combed through dusty records, forgotten ledgers, and personal diaries left behind in the recesses of the ward. Each document added another layer to the tapestry of tragedy, a story of human frailty, hubris, and the devastating consequences of meddling with forces beyond mortal understanding. The journal of a young intern, whose hopeful dreams had turned to despair, recounted how the doctor's experiments had aimed to create a bridge between life and death, only to shatter the barrier in ways that condemned many to eternal suffering. In the margins of the journal, desperate scrawls warned of a curse that would claim all who sought to unravel the secrets of the forgotten ward. As dawn began to break over Manila, the first tentative rays of sunlight filtered through the broken windows of the ward, illuminating the dust-laden air and casting long, mournful shadows on the floor. Elena emerged from the depths of the ward a changed woman. The horrors she had witnessed, the truths she had uncovered, had left an indelible mark on her soul. Though she had managed to escape the physical confines of the hospital, the memory of that night, the whispers, the spectral guide, the visions in the mirror would forever haunt her dreams. In the weeks that followed, Elena dedicated herself to bringing the dark history of the forgotten ward to light. She compiled her findings into a manuscript, carefully documenting every detail of the experiments, the ghostly apparitions, and the tragic fates of those who had been ensnared by the ward's curse. Her work, though met with skepticism by some, resonated deeply with those who had long suspected that the hospital's past was shrouded in more than mere neglect. Soon, her manuscript became a reference for others who sought to understand the intersection of science and the supernatural, a chilling testament to the dangers of venturing too far into the unknown. Yet, even as Elena found solace in her pursuit of truth, the echoes of the forgotten ward continued to visit her in the quiet moments of the night. In the silence before sleep, she could still hear the soft, rhythmic tapping of unseen hands, the mournful whispers of souls long lost, and the faint, sorrowful strains of a piano playing a dirge that no living person could compose. Her reflection in the mirror would sometimes linger a moment too long, as if the ward's legacy was trying to pull her back into its eternal embrace. Years later, Elena's account of the forgotten ward would become part of Manila's urban legend, a haunting narrative passed from one generation to the next. Those who visited the site, now reduced to rubble in memory, claimed to hear the faint echo of a nurse's footsteps and the distant cry of a soul yearning for release. Some even spoke of a spectral figure in a faded uniform roaming among the ruins, her eyes filled with both sorrow and defiance, reminder that the past, however dark, could never truly be buried. The legacy of the forgotten ward was not confined to the pages of Elena's manuscript or the crumbling remains of the hospital. It seeped into the very fabric of the city, a silent testament to the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the alleys of Manila, locals would pause and listen, half expecting to hear the soft echoes of footsteps, the murmur of long-forgotten voices, and the distant sound of a piano playing a melancholy tune. Elena's journey had begun as an attempt to uncover the truth behind the hospital's abandoned halls, but it ultimately revealed a deeper, more unsettling reality. That some mysteries are woven into the very soul of a place, and that the past, no matter how deeply it is buried, will always find a way to resurface. Her story, like that of the patients and doctors who had suffered in the ward, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the quest for knowledge can sometimes lead to revelations that shatter the boundaries between life and death. Now, whenever someone speaks of the forgotten ward, they recall the brave nurse who dared to confront the echoes of a tortured past. Elena's legacy endures in every whispered rumor and every flicker of light seen in the ruins on a moonlit night. The ward's secrets remain, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to venture into its depths and hear the echoes of history, a history that refuses to be forgotten. Do you dare listen to the whispers of the past? In the silence of the night, when the city sleeps, the echoes of the forgotten ward remind us that some stories are never truly over, and that every shadow holds a secret waiting to be discovered.